everybody. Welcome to the first Arable Conversation of the first Arable Scotland in person for a few years. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. Our first conversation is going to be chaired by Colleen McCulloch, who's the Senior Farming Programmes Advisor for Soil Association Scotland. I'm going to hand over to her now.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay with the mic there? I need to remember to not shout that I've got a mic on. Thank you everyone very much for coming. Before I introduce the speakers, a quick couple of notes. This is a friendly and inclusive event, so please keep questions and comments respectful and polite. We will be filmed for people who can't attend in person today, so just be aware of that as well. And if you can put your phones on silent as well so that we don't get that interruption through the talk. And so I'll introduce our speakers and then they'll get a chance to introduce themselves properly for a couple of minutes each. And then we're going to invite people from the audience to ask questions about the topic that we're talking about. So today we're here to have a conversation and a chat about how do you balance net zero and biodiversity? What are the ways of farming that can deliver for both rather than focusing on one or the other? So we've got a panel of speakers here who I think have some ideas and solutions that are being tried and tested over time that it would be really good to hear some thoughts about and get your questions about. So I've got John Kerr from Scottish Government, Ali Carley from James Hutton Institute, Doug Christie from Jury Farms, and David Aglin from Balbirnie Farms. So John, if we start with you, if you want to take the microphone and just introduce yourself for a minute or two.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I'm John Kerr. I am now the Head of Agriculture Policy at the Scottish Government, but it's really nice to see some familiar faces from SASA here, where I used to actually look after potatoes, which is the other crop. So it's nice to see folk. So my interest in this is now from the point of view of how do we take our policy forward, how do we integrate the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity gain into farming businesses in a way that you guys can understand and engage with and make it meaningful for your businesses. We're starting with the harder of those two things with biodiversity, because later on there's going to be a talk on carbon calculators, which you can boil down to one number, whereas with biodiversity it's a bit trickier than that. So we're really keen to be engaged with everybody in this discussion as we take our policy forward, and one of the key ways that we're doing that is through our national test programme, but we're also working through Nature Scot with some of the other piloting approaches to how we measure on-farm biodiversity gain across a different range of businesses, so arable, dairy, upland, all the different types of farms there are in Scotland. So really keen to engage with the conversation with you today, so I'll stop talking and pass the mic along.
Okay, we've got Ali Carley from James Hutton Institute.
Hello, I'm Alison Carley, agroecologist at James Hutton Institute. Today I'm actually being my colleague Cathy Hawes, who unfortunately can't be here today on the panel. We both work in the Integrated Cropping Systems team, and Cathy's work focuses on one of her roles is to oversee the running of the Centre for Sustainable Cropping. This is a long-term rotational platform which Cathy is now nearing the end of the second rotation, so it's a 6-year arable rotation. And in that experimental platform, Cathy here has worked with colleagues in the farms and external advisors to operate what is called an integrated management approach for each of those 6 crops, and to compare that integrated approach with a conventional or standard, if there is such a term, cropping approach that is used for that crop within the rotation. The platform has evolved over the 10 plus years that it's been running, but the aim that Cathy is aiming for with that is to balance the environmental benefits with the economic viability. And so she's really looking at a whole host of practices that optimise biodiversity, but also look at carbon savings. And it's really rather than seeing these as separate targets, separate goals, for which there may be one set of practices for biodiversity enhancement and another set of practices for carbon savings or reducing greenhouse gas emissions, what Kath is trying to do is saying, actually, it's all part of the same thing. They're not mutually exclusive, and there may be ways of going about it that benefit both outcomes. I'm not as familiar with the platform and the results as Kathy would be, so I'm sorry that she's not here, but I will do my best to answer any questions about it, and certainly that we can have discussions after, if anyone is particularly interested in pointing in the right direction. But I think the key thing is that being able to adopt these kinds of approaches, which, as John says, there aren't necessarily easy metrics to measure biodiversity. It really relies on a very good understanding of the biology and ecology of the system, and that's something that land managers need us help with, and advice and information about. That's what scientists are trying to do, but it's also what these types of events are trying to do. And what Kath is trying to do is develop the metrics and indices that can help work out whether biodiversity is being improved with different practices, whether there are greenhouse gas emission savings or carbon savings from reduced inputs. So I'll leave it there. There's lots more that could be said, but I think these people know more about the actual practice.
Good morning. Doug Christie at Dury Farms at Leven. I have a roughly 1,500 acres, and a third of that farm was converted to organic in 2006, but that was mainly the livestock side of the farm. So I've got a beef suckler herd, and I finish the cattle on that. The other 2/3 of the farm, I went off at a slight tangent or off the rails, as some people might point at me. Maybe about the year 2000, 1999, and most of that part of the farm has not been ploughed since then. And that's an arable stockless rotation. So in the last 10 years, I basically all direct drilling. I've integrated all of the sort of the regenerative soil principles. I don't really want to call myself a regenerative farmer. I'm mainly but I like to. I don't think food production is in itself one of my main aim is to make money, but at the end of the day, but I want to address all the other issues at the same time surrounding agriculture. What's been pointed at farmers this now, like they're supposed to be destroying the environment, but I think that's far from the case in a Scottish situation with most farmers. I've also integrated companion cropping into the rotation. I've got a diverse rotation. I try to have living roots in the soil the whole time. I don't like seeing bare soil. I like seeing I'm aiming to have all the residue of the crop on the surface rather than ploughing it down. And all these things, I haven't cracked the nut. I'm not, I can't say I'm getting the top yields, but my margins are certainly better. For example, and just take a case in point, I'm using 4.5 litres a hectare to establish a crop. But the big, what I see, on the input side, I've reduced inputs quite considerably. Nitrogen, as I used to buy 3 loads of ammonium nitrate or urea, and now I'm only buying 2 loads a year. But that's mainly having legumes in the rotation, or a leguminous break crops. Also, the one thing that's missing from the arable stockless rotation is getting livestock back onto the system. And I'm noticing after 20 years there is a build-up of certain weeds that would be addressed with livestock on the farm, having perennials in for 2 or 3 years and then back into arable. And I think there's a lot, that's where I want to sort of concentrate next, on the bringing livestock back onto the arable rotation, even whether it means using the wintered cover crops, so cover crops that I sow in after harvest or prior to harvest, and using them for livestock feed over the winter, because the main costs on the cattle part of the enterprise have always been the winter feeding costs and the plastic and the silage and the taking the muck out of the sheds. But if I can have them outside all year round, which I'm making inroads to this now on the organic side of the system, I'm keeping the cows out until the end of January now on deferred grazing, using a adaptive multi-paddock grazing system, or mob grazing as like to be called. But I'm trying to use all these sort of regenerative farming techniques and integrate them into the system. And there's not really, I can't see any downsides myself, but I'm an observationist. I observe a lot of things, but I'm not a scientist. And for my system, I'm not trying to sell anything, but for my system, it's working. It's working for me in the long. And I have seen anecdotal. I've seen increases in biodiversity and carbon sequestration, and I'm taking quite rigorous organic matter content levels on the soils on both parts of the farm for the last 20, 30 years, and they're on the increase. The soils are not being degraded. But I'll pass you across to David.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Aglen from Balburney Home Farms. I don't know how I follow that, Doug, but anyway. We're a mixed farming business in Central Fife. We have about 200 suckler cows, and we've about 800 hectares of arable cropping, including some vegetables and root crops. We're just like Doug, we're trying to follow the principles of regenerative agriculture. It's a very divisive word, so we'll try and avoid using it just now. But we're trying to keep the soil covered. We're trying to reduce our inputs. We're reducing soil disturbance. We're direct drilling as much as we can. We're not organic. We are trying to integrate our livestock back into the arable side of the farm, a bit like a lot of farms over the last 30 or 40 years. We've kind of kept the cattle at one end on the poorer ground and taken the dung to the rest of the farm, whereas actually we need to be moving the livestock around the whole business. So that's kind of a way of introducing some diversity into our rotation. We're growing some cover crops to graze cattle on, forage crops to graze them through the winter. Again, we're trying to outwinter our livestock, so we're just down to housing them for calving now, and hopefully in the next couple of years there will be no stock in the shed at all, unless it's for welfare reasons. And we'll say we're cover cropping every acre we can through the winter, so every acre either has a cover crop on it or a cash crop for the following year, so winter cereals. And we're seeing great savings across the business in terms of fuel use, machinery costs, etc., labour costs. We use half the amount of diesel now that we did 10 years ago across the whole farm, which even when I realised that was quite staggering actually. What else are we doing? Our soil, we are noticing our soil structure improve. We're holding a bit more water, anecdotally that is. Definitely the water's not ponding on the fields quite so much. So I think we must be draining away a good deal better. And biodiversity-wise, we've tinkered a little bit with the companion cropping. We haven't had a lot of success with it at the minute, but we're still trying bits and bobs. We've got some peas and beans growing together this year. Suggestion from PGRO is that you can increase your overall yield by 20% by doing that. It seems a no-brainer, really, just for putting another bit of seed in the mix. As well as reducing weed pressure too. So that's essentially where we are, just trying to improve our diversity and build carbon potentially.
Great, thanks very much. So we can open it up to the audience now. Has anybody got any particular questions to kick us off? Let's see, lady at the front.
Thank you. Vicky Robinson from Leaf, Linking Environment and Farming. Mentioned at the beginning about metrics and developing metrics and indices, and then Doug and David, you just mentioned about more observational aspects. So my question is, how important from a farmer's perspective are the metrics to you and reporting them, and what would support you in being able to do that?
Good question. I think the difficulty, as was pointed out by John at the start, is that biodiversity is very variable, and this is where we're going to struggle really, because policymakers will want to put a number on it. How diverse is my field margin compared to Doug's, compared to other people sitting in the room? Do I get 10 points and they get 12 points? Do I get less money than them? Is it worth any money at all? I don't know. There's talk around the country now of biodiversity having a value for commercial business. To they want to greenwash themselves, and greenwashing is a terrible idea. But actually, if there's cash sitting there, why shouldn't we take it? I don't know the answer really. I think with difficulty is the right answer. How do you pin a number on it? If I've got more flowers, less flowers, different species, rarer species, is that right or wrong? Nature's so seasonal, so how are we going to vary policy season to season? Or we're just going to have a tick box that said, well, I established a margin, it doesn't matter whether it did really well or not, versus the alternative? Or do we need biodiversity within crops? Do we have multi-species crops? That's going to add even more. I like to think, I think the better way long term is to look at land sharing and not land sparing. So there's a great notion that we can ramp up production on the better land and just sideline the poorer land, and nature can have that. But nature's everywhere. It's on the good land, it's on the poor land. So I think we've got to work a system that we can get it all to coexist across every acre, I would imagine. But yeah, I'm not being very helpful, sorry. I haven't got a proper answer. It's what you're after.
Yeah, I think profit is number one, and I don't make my profit out of the bumblebees or the bees or the hares on the farm or the red partridge that have increased in numbers on the farm. But so basically, all I'm getting paid for this now is my cropping and my cattle, and that's how I make money at the end of the day. And I think agriculture, food production has got to be the core of farming land, but I'm wanting to be able to farm land and see an increase in the biodiversity. And for example, we've got a core path running along the farm, and I just put a 2 meter, 3 meter strip of direct drilled of multi-species flowers, sunflowers and phacelia and things like that. And this is in the middle of COVID, and there was a group of 5 older women walking along the core path, and their faces lit up, and you saw them going in. I was at a distance, and you could saw them jumping the fence with difficulty and picking a few sunflowers. And I think the amount of comments I've had from walkers around the farm saying, "Oh, what's that crop there?" And there was another crop of flowering linseed and so on, and that brought a lot of smiles to people's faces at a fairly rough time where people were inside a lot of the time. But I don't know how you measure the metrics of it. It's very, very tricky. Could you put a price on a bumblebee or a hare or whatever it is? I don't think you can. Would you want to at the end of the day? Also, the research done on woodland of forestry in the UK a couple of years ago, and they found out that they evaluated the rough value of natural capital of forestry, and it was 10 times the annual yearly, 10 times more than the annual timber sales. So the natural capital of forestry brings 10 times the amount of the actual production of timber in the UK. So can't that be transposed to farmland as well if you manage farmland properly? Because it's soil at the end of the day, and the same with concentration of carbon in organic matter in peatlands. But farmland is soil as well, but it's not peat, but it's still soil at the end of the day. We've got to protect that soil. We don't want it washing down the rivers and polluting watercourses with phosphates and chemicals.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think John might want to come in with how do you start to measure and put numbers on something as complex as biodiversity?
Thanks. So I think it was really interesting to hear hear what the farmers had to say, and that's the most important thing. I think Doug's been a bit hard on himself to say he thinks about profit. I've been on the farm, and it's managed with a lot more than profit in mind. So a bit of false modesty there, and I pay tribute to the way that he's managing the farm. I think what's clear from a government perspective is that our policies to support biodiversity haven't worked in terms of the greening in particular. And there's criticism of AICS because not everybody can engage with that, and we would like to try and fix both of those problems. But the measurement of biodiversity on farms is one of the most difficult things that we want to try and achieve, but we do want to try and achieve that, and that's why we've got the piloting work underway ourselves and through Nature Scot to try and address that. But what we've stated clearly, though, is that we want performance on climate and biodiversity to be key parts of the enhanced payment element of our future policy. So there'll be a basic payment which will have to meet certain requirements, but 50% of the money is going to be for adding value, which is specifically targeted towards food producers who are delivering for biodiversity and for climate, and the types of farming that are being talked about here. But you're absolutely right that providing that measurement tool is going to be difficult, and we're wrestling with that at the moment, and everybody's input is really welcome to the discussion.
Thanks very much. Is there another question up the back?
Hi, Paul Richardson at Scottish Land and Estates. It's a question for John, please. It's an easy one, John. You mentioned the biodiversity assessment pilot that's going on with the Scottish Government and Nature Scot. Are you able to tell us what plans there are to maybe bring that into the national test programme and roll it out more widely across the industry, and when we could maybe expect that? Thanks.
Yeah, so it's a really active area of discussion within the policy development. One of the things that the Agricultural Reform Boards, the ARIOB boards, which we've set up, co-chaired with the Cabinet Secretary Martin Kennedy, with lots of views in the room. They were really wanting to see us roll out biodiversity auditing along with carbon auditing. You may know that we've already launched support for people to do carbon audits of their business. But the biodiversity auditing is more complicated, as we've already said, so getting that as part of that first offering was going to be too challenging to do well, and we want to make sure that we can support people to do something that's meaningful. So that piloting works with a smaller group of people at the moment, and we want to roll that into the national test programme in the coming, well, we would like to do that in the next year, but whether we'll be able to upscale that enough with enough capacity around it to do it as well as we would like to, that's the key challenge for us. So we definitely are under, rightly, pressure from those that are supporting the process in the ARIOB group to do that fast, but we also want to do it well. So we're balancing that off, one against the other. And I think that the piloting work isn't just one thing that the Nature Scot have been doing, so they're piloting a range of approaches from natural capital accounting for a business to actual on-farm measurement across all the different sectors with sector scorecards of how do you measure biodiversity in an arable system, how do you measure it in a dairy system. So those approaches are being developed, and they are being developed with farmers, so it's just a question of when we can bring that out at scale and get it right.
Thanks, John. Next question, chap at the front.
Hi, I'm Roger Sylvester Bradley. I'm from ADAS, work mainly in England, but I'm interested in whether you think, particularly the farmers, you can have your cake and eat it. I mean, I've worked, certainly the first part of my career was working on improving productivity, and we were very successful, but then everybody seems to have assumed from the 90s that we can't do anything about productivity. So I hear you're reducing your costs, but does that mean your productivity is staying the same, going down, going up?
Thank you.
I'm afraid to say it's probably staying the same. I've always wanted to aim higher at the end of the day. I'm after that holy grail of increasing productivity, as well as ticking all the other boxes, whether it's be carbon or biodiversity or soil runoff or whatever it is. And I'm sure there's a way of doing it, but is out of a bottle fix the answer? Is at the end of the day, surely we've got to be a lot more cleverer about it. And obviously biology and the chemical, physical and biological properties of soil, the biology is making more of an entrance to farmers. I think and nature is amazing. Within 3 years, varieties break down from yellow rust. But why? Why are they breaking down so quickly now? Is it the resilience in the varieties? Is it the varieties we grow? Is it you did a research on root length biomass, and on the species of modern varieties of wheat have a fraction of the root biomass that they did in the 80s even. So I think we've got to think it's all encompassing. I don't think one size fits all will increase productivity, but I think we've got to harness nature to be able to get higher yields. How you do that, I don't know. I think we've got to be a bit more clever on the plant breeding as well. And yield is very important, but at the expense of having to put a lot more chemicals on, I don't know. Or nitrogen use efficiency. I'm sure there's a huge scope for improving nitrogen use efficiency, because only 40% of the synthetic nitrogen we put on is taken up by the crop. It's expensive as well.
I think we can improve production. I think at worst we maintain. In the long term, if we're clever enough, we can increase it. We're hosting this HDB strategic cereals and oilseeds for Scotland farm at Balbirnie, and we're doing trial work now looking at reducing fungicide usage and using some biology and trying to improve our soil health to get similar results. And looking at our crop, and we did a trial last year on a smaller scale, and the fields, this is anecdotal work really now, but the farm standard, which was using a lot of biology and trace elements, didn't yield. The yields were comparable with a full fungicide program, and we've done the same trial this year, but on a bigger scale, and I can't tell a difference. Like fields of we've got one fungicide in our farm standard practice now on wheat, and I walked around some trial plots yesterday and was told that we're losing the battle with Septoria now in Scotland in a major way, and I saw plots that were dirtier than what we have at home using less fungicide. And Doug's point about the nitrogen is very valid. We've started using foliar urea as a nitrogen source sprayed onto the plants, so we believe we can get much higher nitrogen use efficiency. As we've moved to direct drilling, our crops have taken a dip in yield as we've transitioned, but we're coming out the other side now, and I don't see why they can't be every bit as good or better than we used to have in the past. I think, and second to all that, we're not going to have a choice. I've just said, we're losing the battle with disease, we're losing the battle with weeds. Pests is the same problem, we're getting resistance. So we're going to have to think differently. We're not going to have a choice. And we just have to get much smarter and maybe just do things a different way and change our mindset a little bit.
I wonder, Ali, if you want to come in with any thoughts of yield from an intercropping point of view, perhaps.
Well, yeah, just to comment. So I've very much admired your research over the years, and it's influenced what I've done. So thank you for coming along today. I think that, as has been alluded to, the game has changed from the 90s through to now. The whole context for farming is changed in quite dramatic ways, and the way that varieties have been bred for farming that happened up till now, I think we need a different mindset for how we breed varieties in the future, because of issues of disease and pest breakdown of disease and increasing pest resistance, and because we need to think about diversity in the system, and that can be through intercropping, which is something we do a lot of work on at the moment, enhancing biodiversity in the field, reducing inputs at the same time, but it could be through variety mixtures. I was talking to scientists last week who were talking about these issues of resistance breakdown. Why can we not be growing varieties with different levels of resistance within the same, monocultures, but different varieties with different types of resistances might be a way to make resistance more robust. But we're not thinking about breeding in that way. Those varieties might exist individually, but they've not been bred to work together. Same with intercropping. We're not breeding, if we're looking at cereal legume intercrops, we've done through multifactorial trials, we've worked out which barley and pea varieties seem to do better together, which wheat and faba or oat and faba bean varieties seem to get better together, but that's just through chance that those varieties express the right traits. They've not been bred to do well together. So I do think we need a complete mindset shift, not just at the farm, but before the farm and after the farm. And I think that's the really important message that, talking to lots of different people about biodiversity and carbon capture and how to do things differently. Everybody needs to be part of this. We can't just rely on the farmers to change what they're doing on the field, because if people aren't going to buy it or support it in some other way, then it's not going to work its way through the value chain. But yeah, I think the kind of work that you and your team were doing decades ago forms the foundation for where we should go back to and think about, well, what traits do we need to breed for our future cropping systems?
Thanks, Ali. Okay, any more questions? Yep, up the back there.
Yeah, George Laurie. I'm a director of James Hutton, but I'm also MD of Scottish Agronomy. I think it's very important that we get the policy right to deliver this, and I'm glad to hear that John's talking about of the EFAs and seriously looking at that. There's a whole array of different things that we can do to enhance biodiversity, but make sure that we have food production at the cornerstone of that policy as well. Because I sat yesterday at a conference talking about food security right through, and it is important that we do that. So there's areas that we can look at farming that deliver biodiversity, but still allow us to go ahead and do mainstream farming. And the first thing a farmer should be looking at is unproductive land that they've got. They should be looking at headlands. They should be looking at their lee wraps and things like that. Why go spend hours changing jets when you can actually go and put biodiversity right along the side of a river and things like that? But the policy has to be there to deliver these sort of advantages as well. Nobody's talked about IPM at the present moment. We're talking about regenerative farming, but there's other ways that we should be looking at that as well. So a plea to say, make sure the policy's right so that we can deliver, because we want to keep on farming. We want to deliver biodiversity with that, but the policy has to be right to deliver that.
Well, I could just say yes. I completely agree with that. I think, but just to unpack that a little bit more, I think I was at the same conference yesterday as George, and the Cabinet Secretary for Scotland was there, and she was really clear about the need to produce food for Scottish consumers, and indeed the point was made by a number of speakers about having to produce food for more than just the people locally, and a lot of the food that's produced in Scotland does feed the rest of the UK predominantly. So that is very much part of, well, it's the bedrock of our policy. Agriculture policy is about policy that supports farmers and crofters primarily to do that job of food production. But I also recognise that, as I said in my remarks earlier on, the policy that we've got at the moment isn't delivering the sorts of approach that are being talked about here. Though they do make room for it, but I think we need to be better at that, and that's why we're trying to develop something that builds on what we have, but definitely takes a step change in making things clearer and more targeted towards those other outcomes as well. And part of that's the metrics that were raised earlier, and part of that is just being very clear about that message about food, biodiversity, the carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions of a farm, and then also about our people. So the Cabinet Secretary and Ms McCallan, who's on the land reform and forestry side, it's all about keeping vibrant rural communities, and farming and forestry are both a key part of that.
Thank you, and I'll give Ali a chance to come in on that as well.
I was just going to say a little thing, really, and thank you, George, for raising IPM, because one of the things that I do worry about is that the terminology we use not everyone's familiar with the terms that we're using, and there are lots of different terms for different practices. So something like increasing the diversity on the farm with intercropping of variety mixtures, that's also an IPM approach. But people might not be thinking about that way. They might be thinking about it one way rather than the other. And I think that's something that would be helpful, is to try and have a language or an understanding so that we know that it's a different way of farming, and it means biodiversity, and it means reducing carbon or having carbon savings, and it means integrated pest management. It actually covers a whole range of things, but it's the way of farming that delivers it. It's not that we have one practice that is for IPM and one practice that's for biodiversity. Anyone else wants to say anything?
Thank you. We've got up in the corner, and then was there someone there first? And then we'll go to the corner after that. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, Andrew. Ewan Greer, farmer. One thing I applaud a lot that I've heard the farmers do. The one thing I slightly can't get my head around is the direct drilling in, and I don't know your farms, but in general, light land on the east coast of Scotland, low winter temperatures, and looking at productivity and different crops that you can grow. It's the one thing that I think, and I worry about it on a policy front, that comes in and rewards not ploughing, where I think it's a fantastic tool for weed control, for all sorts of structures. It would be just good to get your view on that, both from policy and from the farmers.
Do
you want me to go? I was hoping to let the farmers go first. So I think from a policy perspective, you can fall into a number of traps by mandating a one-size-fits-all approach, and that would be a mistake. We have used the term sustainable and regenerative farming in our approach to policy, and that reflects the makeup of the Parliament and the green influence on the government policy, which is, in the context of this discussion, probably a welcome thing. But I recognise that there may be fears associated with that, which you said. But so we're trying to draw a delicate balance between the definitions of regenerative agriculture, and we already heard, I think, David say that it's a pejorative term. But the principles underneath that of building your soils, creating more room for nature on the farm, those sorts of things, I think most farmers, probably all farmers, would agree with. So I think the key thing is to focus on the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and that there are many methods that might deliver them. But that's actually quite a difficult thing to build a policy around. So that's partly why we're taking our time about it. And definitely why we're engaging directly with farmers and other experts in the field to try and put that together. But that means you're going to have to be a bit patient with us in bringing that final policy forward. So I'm trying to buy myself some time.
Thank you. Doug and David, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm not, just put it straight, I'm not part of the no-till Taliban, but I've used as a way of reducing costs. I used to plough, and it worked very well. In the middle of one thing I won't go back to, though, I might go back to ploughing on a rotational ploughing, but I'm not going to be going out in the middle of December when the soils are saturated, being pulled by another tractor in front of me to get me up the hill, because the damage that does is phenomenal. And if I was going back to ploughing, and I plough on the organic side of the farm for my crops. I grow a few organic crops. I would do it in the spring. I would have it in a stubble all winter, or have it as a cover crop all winter, and then just do it in the spring. I don't have heavy soils, so I don't need the frost to break that down, but I was finding prior to going down the no-till route, my soils were becoming increasingly heavier and more difficult to break down. There was no structure in there. It was in the soils at all. So it's not the total answer, but I think it can help build soil structure. Yeah. Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, you can't. I can't. You can't. I don't think you can do no-till without changing your rotation, having cover crops, and integrating a lot of it. It won't work in isolation. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I'm having a slight more increased reliance on chemicals to control some of the weeds, and that's why bringing perennials back into the system and livestock back into the system can address that.
Taliban. Didn't think I'd hear that word today. We do plough some fields for our sins when it suits. We don't own a plough, we just get somebody to come and do it for us, the bits we need to do. Sometimes it's when we're getting a houk and we need out in a hurry, or sometimes it's just the right thing to do for weed pressure or what have you. And what's difficult with that is we still have root crops in the rotation, and we haven't quite sussed that. The balance between that and no-till is tricky. But once we get a year or two away from them, it's quite good. What I would say to government actually and policymakers is what would be really good, and I feel for guys, I've been lucky, I've been employed by people who really want to do this and let me make all the cock-ups and I'm not going to lose my job because the field didn't do well, as it were. So I am really fortunate and I appreciate that. And a lot of people aren't in that position. But I don't think we can all as an industry learn on our own, and certainly peer-to-peer transfer, like with the HDB and strategic farm and monitor farm, things that can be really useful. But I think we need to have a piling of money into research to bring farmers like you and others along who are nervous about taking these steps. I mean, it would be totally wrong for government to come out and say, right, you must no-till 80% of your farm every year. It's just the wrong thing to do. You're not going to lead people in a positive fashion that way. But we need to get the research that gives others the confidence to take that step and have a go at it and understand the consequences and the costs of maybe when it doesn't work, but also really understand the benefits. Because at the minute we just seem to have farmers that do it and we think we're right, and lots of farmers who don't do it and they think they're right to a certain extent. And we need to bridge that gap, and I think research is what's needed to help bridge that gap and help these guys that just are really nervous about taking the step, because there are yield penalties, Sorry? You think it's not nervousness? Okay, lack of confidence then, or just not? But it might be the right option financially too. Okay, but either way, whatever terminology we are or are not going to use, we need to have some work done so we can present the figures to those that aren't are more better informed, perhaps, of the output.
So I completely agree with what that last, everything, but particularly want to pick up on the last point. So we've, over the last few years, at the James Hutton Institute, and particularly in our agroecology group, we've been doing more and more research with farmers like people who are here with us, but all over Scotland and all over the UK, all over Europe. And it's been very successful at helping people try something new that they perhaps hadn't considered before, whether or not they think it's right for their system, or they just want to give it a go, or they think it's right but they didn't quite know how to make a start of it. But that kind of research is very different to the kind of research we generally do in our own fields or labs or glass houses. it takes a different skill set, it takes different levels of resourcing, and it also takes farmers' time as well, to farmers and researchers working together. Organisations like Soil Association, like LEAF, like HDB are great at facilitating it, but I think there could be more effort invested in supporting that kind of research, because I agree that's a key way that we're going to get that information out to more people and help people try things that are new and different over a larger area than maybe just the small numbers of farmers that are working with organisations like us and other research institutes across the UK. So thinking a bit differently about how we fund and run this kind of research, I think, is key. And it's slowly changing, but I would say there's still a way to go.
Thanks very much. I'm aware we've got another question, and then we're going to have to think about wrapping it up soon because we're running out of time. But we'll take the question from the corner there, please. And then I'll see how we're doing for time.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chairman. We've had Andrew Moyer, Scottish Quality Crops Chairman. We've got two farmers there showing us the way on forward from their point of view, which is absolutely great. But what I would like to, maybe this is directed to John, and John knows I want to move faster in this than we can possibly move on this. But we have a lot of farmers out there using technology to a very large extent that are driving efficiencies, driving productivity, and really doing good things for biodiversity as well, because we are really targeting these inputs. And that's only going to accelerate. My plea would be for John, possibly here, the question really is that we do, or not a question, but a statement really for John, to not forget that these leaders and I'm not saying you're not leaders, you two farmers here, but there is a lot of people doing an awful lot of work on the tech side that really needs to be recognised going forward with. I'm not going to call it support, I'm going to call it an investment from government going forward. It's investment in these guys that are doing a lot just now, but should not be ignored because they are moving in an arc that's probably a lot faster than possibly government recognise.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. You've said that to us very often, so everybody who's not part of the Arab can rest assured that that point is being made at the heart of our policy making frequently, and we're listening very closely to it. I think in terms of the technology side and the farmers that are embracing that, I would say that there's always going to be people who are ahead of where government policy is going to be. That's the nature of being progressive farming business at the cutting edge, and I think that you should crack on. Don't wait for government to catch up, but show us the way. So that is very welcome. I think we have done a lot of underpinning research. The work that's done, here, the work that's done at SRUC as well. And government has funded that work. So the technology doesn't appear out of a vacuum from nothing. So the governments across the world do that work. But I think that the take-home message one of the take-home messages from me from the meeting yesterday was actually Minister Poots from Northern Ireland, who said, we've got the intelligence, we've got the tools, but have we got the entrepreneurship to deliver the future agricultural system we want to see? And that really reinforced to me the fact that it's government and industry working together, but the entrepreneurship comes from the farming sector, and I think we've had a really good discussion this morning about potential ways forward. Clearly different views about the systems that we can approach to that are being expressed, and I welcome that as well, recognising that one size doesn't fit all for all farms, but I think that we just need to continue to work in partnership. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, we've sort of managed to rapidly run out of time this morning, but I'm going to invite the other panel members to give any last comments, if you have any last comments that you want to add that haven't been raised already. And I think there's been a few really key themes here, and the sort of working in collaboration and learning from each other is really important. So I don't know, Ali, if you've got any things that you want to sort of sum up and then pass along. Thanks.
Really just to reiterate that collaboration, not just between researchers and farmers, but farmers and agronomists and advisors, and that's something that we as research organisations, SRUC, James Hutton Institute and others really want to facilitate, so to be able to make progress and help people move down the path they want to move with their farms.
I think government have a place to play in directing farming for the future. I want to get off that subsidy bandwagon. I'm just about there. I don't want to be reliant. I'm sure the government have got a lot more pressing issues with their funds than agriculture. Carbon and biodiversity are obviously very important, but I can think that can be addressed with a healthy agricultural economy, self-sufficient agricultural economy, and hopefully it will blend in together. I'm very happy about the way I've gone. It's not the way all farmers want to do it, and everyone's got their different opinions and so on. But on my farm in isolation, I reckon I'm on the right road going forward for a resilient future.
I think couple of points that were made earlier about food production and also everybody working together. I think to get the maximum benefit of all of this, we need the marketplace to come with us too. 50% of the combinable crops we grow at Balburney are not food, it's alcohol. So we have ample land to grow food as an industry if we actually are honest with ourselves. You know, all that wheat that goes for gin and barley that goes for gin and whiskey, etc. It's not food really. So we can create a massive amount of space for nature and biodiversity, but we also need the marketplace to come with us, because basically currently we grow what the marketplace is after. It wants malting barley, it wants distilling wheat, etc., and that's what we produce. So if we can have policymakers also signalling change within the marketplace somehow too, that would help us greatly.
Great. Well, I think it just leaves it to me to wrap up and say thank you so much to all of our panel speakers, and thank you to everyone in the audience. We've had some great questions, and if you've had a question that we didn't have time to answer, our panellists will be sort of milling around through the day, so do approach folk and have chats with people if you see them. But maybe wait until they get their cup of tea and coffee first. So thank you so much for everybody's input today, and do look out for the other panel discussions that are on throughout the day, and have a good day. Thanks very much.